Welcome to the Committee on Present Danger, China. Thanks to Brian and Frank and Steve and the rest of the crew at the committee. I'm sorry I can't be there today, but I do want to video in and talk a little bit about China's access to the U.S. capital markets and some of the things that have gone on for a long time where basically people have put their heads in their sand, including ERISA fiduciaries and other fiduciaries of even U.S. military personnel are now sending capital abroad and basically funding China's malevolent ideology across the sea. So I think it's important to talk about two things that are going on. One of course, is the U.S. government and the TSP deciding to potentially invest their capital and index it to MSCI World Indices, which by definition forces capital to invest in companies that are not Dodd-Frank compliant or don't submit themselves to U.S. Public Accounting Oversight Board covered auditors. And it just seems to me that you have this war that China's fighting on four fronts, right? They fight the information war, they fight the economic war, they fight the cyber war. The only war we're not fighting with China is the kinetic war. And from an investment management perspective, all global investment fiduciaries can't wait to invest another dime in China or dollar in China. And I think when we think about this from the perspective of U.S. national security policy and or policy of the jobs that have been lost in the U.S. and the Rust Belt to the Chinese and outsourcing our jobs to China, I think when we think about investment fiduciaries, we're not doing our job when, as a fiduciary, especially under ERISA, there's this prudent man policy. Being prudent does not mean investing in a company that's not Dodd-Frank compliant or investing in a company that doesn't submit itself to an audit because China deems that all of their state-owned companies to basically hold state or national secrets, and therefore they can't be audited by U.S. Western or covered auditors. I think what we've got to do as a country is, number one, stop investing our military's retirement funds or forcibly investing their money in China. And as the TSP CIO recently said, he doesn't want to politicize this process. He wants to be able to be free to do whatever he wants to do. But as we all know at the Committee on the Present Danger China, we're dealing with a regime that live organ harvests, that has up to 3 million political prisoners in jail just due to their religious preference, and steals $200 to $580 billion worth of intellectual property from the United States every year, as per the U.S. Trade Report to the White House earlier this year. All of those things move together, and as we think about that from an investment management perspective, we just seem to put our head in the sand. And I think fiduciaries should be held to a higher standard, and fiduciaries should be forced to invest only in companies that are compliant with U.S. securities laws. Again, think about what I just said for a second. We should force our fiduciaries to only invest in companies that comply with U.S. law. That actually isn't a great leap. That isn't a tough step to take. So far, what we've done is simply turned a blind eye and put our head in the sand as fiduciaries and invested in China. The problem is we're investing in companies that are providing the surveillance equipment and surveillance know-how to basically take those political prisoners in Xinjiang and sometimes even build the concentration camps. Hell, the World Bank has a $100 million loan to Xinjiang today that U.S. taxpayers back so that they could build the concentration camps for their political prisoners. This kind of craziness has to stop. And I think Rubio's new Equitable Act is a very important bill. It's a bipartisan attempt to stop the capital flow to China. And I think that if we pay a lot of attention to enforcing and reinforcing the Equitable Act as we go forward and supporting Rubio, Menendez, all the Republicans and Democrats as we move forward, I think it's very important for all of us on the Committee on the Present Danger to basically help that bill get through Congress. And I actually believe it can pass with a veto-proof supermajority. When we on the Committee on the Present Danger of China think about what Marco Rubio and his committee are putting together with the Equitable Act, very important to support all of the aspects of that act. In fact, the first iteration of that legislation will be changed in the coming weeks, and the new changes will actually further restrict capital from moving to China. Number one, the first iteration talked about delisting Chinese companies from the U.S. when they don't comply with Dodd-Frank standards and or submitting themselves to a PCAOB audit. We need to take that and use ERISA and the Department of Labor to force ERISA fiduciaries to not invest in or prohibit them from investing in foreign companies that also don't apply or comply with Dodd-Frank standards and or covered auditor oversight. And these seem to be somewhat easy steps to take, although the investment world can't wait to invest another shekel in a Chinese company because what China does is it corrupts a few and it makes them very wealthy. And you all know that there are certain billionaires out there that are the greatest lobbyists for China with our administration, in both the Obama administration and the Trump administration. And we have to see through that and basically say, no more U.S. dollars investing in companies that don't have real audits and that aren't Dodd-Frank compliant. And Frank and Brian and the rest of everyone at the Committee on the Present Danger, those are the single most important things that we can do to stop the flow of capital. And what I mean by capital is U.S. dollars to China. China is desperately short dollars, as we saw just 2 days ago, where they magically opened up investment quotas in their QFII and our QFII accounts, which clearly they weren't even close to those limits. And yet they said, our doors are open for capital to come in. And as I think it says the spider to the fly. We need to stop our capital from going over there. We need to stop U.S. dollars from building up the Chinese military, from building up their surveillance state, from building up the machine that does nothing but work against the United States over the long run. So thank you for listening today, and I look forward to seeing the next iteration of the Equitable Act and the committee's support therein.